People often say, you never truly know someone until you see how they treat those they believe are beneath them. That seemingly trite phrase turned prophetic on a mild, sunlit morning at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. It would mark the opening line of one of the most unforgettable stories that hundreds of people would later recount on the ground or in the skies. It was a day like any other. A stream of hurried travelers rolled their suitcases briskly across the gleaming corridors. Office workers in neutral-toned suits, hot coffee in hand, faces tightened by a packed schedule. Families bustled with different energy, children jittery with excitement, parents glued to the departure screens, anxious not to miss boarding time. Amid that sea of people, two individuals existed without any awareness of each other. But fate, or the airline's seat allocation algorithm, had decided to place them side by side. Neither knew that within a few hours, they would become the two central characters in a situation that would silence an entire cabin and ignite a firestorm across social media. One of them was Ava Mitchell. She stood near the boarding gate, composed. Her matte, hard-shell suitcase stood beside her, a gray blazer wrapped neatly around her poised frame. Ava didn't try to look important, but anyone watching could tell she was a serious businesswoman. At 32, Ava was the CEO of Shield Logic AI, a tech startup she had built from scratch. Today, she was heading to Seattle for a meeting that could launch her company into an entirely new era. Across the boarding gate stood Bradley Whitman, dressed in an expensive suit, hair slicked back, eyes irritated as he checked his watch repeatedly. He exuded another version of success, a man far too accustomed to privilege, too used to never being told no, too used to sitting in the best seat next to the person he deemed worthy. Ava, on the other hand, was simply a first-class passenger, a black woman who had climbed with her hands and mind to the highest stratosphere of the American tech industry. The flight that day, AA-476 from Dallas to Seattle, took off like any other. But it carried more than just luggage, business cards, and MacBooks. It carried a test of human character, confined within narrow seats, cruising at 35,000 feet. And it only took a glance, a comment, a moment of unease from the adjacent seat for the story to begin. The intercom chimed, smooth and rhythmic. We are now inviting passengers needing special assistance, those traveling with young children and active-duty military personnel, to board flight AA-476 to Seattle. Ava didn't rush. She knew this drill well. As an airline platinum member, she understood the boarding hierarchy and knew exactly when to rise and when to stay seated. Bradley was different. When the announcement ended, he jumped his polished leather shoes, striking the carpet with unnecessary force. One hand gripped a Toomey suitcase, the other on his hip. He glanced toward the boarding gate and frowned, not because of any delay, but because he saw someone standing near the priority lane. Ava. His gaze passed over her for less than a second, but Ava recognized that look too well. It wasn't quite anger, nor blatant contempt. It was a suspicion laced with guarded discomfort. Something close to, who is she? Why is she standing here? Ava walked calmly toward the gate when first-class passengers were called, offering the flight attendant a gentle smile. She paid no mind to Bradley's gaze, or at least she pretended not to. They entered the aircraft almost at the same time. Ava turned right into the first-class cabin locating seat 2A, the window seat she had reserved in advance. She sat down, placed her purse on her lap, and exhaled softly, a precious moment of calm amid a whirlwind of business trips. The wide leather seat embraced her back, far removed from the days when she had to squeeze into the rear rows, her mind consumed with startup loan repayments. Bradley followed shortly. He glanced at his boarding pass seat 2B, then looked at Ava beside it, and for 2 seconds the cabin's fresh air seemed to freeze. Bradley furrowed his brow, looked at her, looked back at his ticket, then grimaced as if he'd just realized he was in the wrong seat. He didn't say a word to Ava. Instead, he turned sharply and strode toward the flight attendant's area. "Excuse me," he said in a low, clipped voice to flight attendant Marcus. "I believe there's been a mistake. My seat can't be 2B. Marcus, tall, middle-aged professional, checked the ticket and nodded. "Sir, that is correct. 2B is your seat." "Is there a problem?" Bradley paused for a moment, then tilted his head slightly toward Ava and said quietly, "Honestly, I just don't feel comfortable sitting next to her." Marcus was silent for a beat. Just a breath, but enough to thicken the air. "Uncomfortable? For what reason, sir?" he asked, still polite but his gaze sharpening. Bradley blinked, then, choosing his words as if walking on glass, said, "I just don't think it's appropriate. I'm used to a certain kind of travel experience." Ava couldn't make out every word, but she knew the language well. She had heard it dozens of times in hundreds of different settings. At banks, in boardrooms, at charity galas. Words that never said race discrimination or prejudice, but dripped with implication. People said things like, "I don't think this is the right environment. Are you sure you're the CEO? We're just looking for someone who fits the company culture." And now it was, "I don't feel comfortable sitting next to her." Marcus looked Bradley in the eye. "I'm very sorry, sir, but first class is full today. We cannot change your seat unless another passenger volunteers." Bradley bit his lip. This was the first time in years that one of his requests had been flatly denied. "I didn't pay over $1,000 to sit uncomfortably," he muttered. At that moment, Ava looked up. She placed her magazine on her lap. She knew she was the unspoken center of this conversation, even if no one said her name. "Is there a problem?" she asked softly, her eyes on Marcus, but the question was aimed squarely at Bradley. All three paused in a moment of silence. Marcus said, "We're handling it, ma'am." Ava nodded, returned to her magazine, but inside the spark had been lit. Ava sat still. Her eyes were fixed on the magazine, but the words before her had begun to blur. She had heard every word Bradley said, not because of the volume, but because she had long been familiar with that tone, the kind that never said it outright, but said just enough for the target to understand. And Ava understood. She had heard things like that since she was a third-grade girl in a Nashville suburb. That day, she had been chosen to lead the advanced math group. A white classmate with blonde hair whispered loudly enough, "Why her? My mom says she doesn't belong in this class." She remembered the teacher's expression, a forced smile. Then her eyes glanced over Ava as if nothing had been said. From that day on, Ava was never picked as group leader again. In high school, Ava ranked first in her class for 3 years. But when she applied for scholarships, her guidance counselor asked, "Are you sure those programs are extremely competitive?" In college, she worked as a teaching assistant for a software engineering professor. One afternoon, after a lab session, a male student approached and said, "I thought you were an admin assistant. Didn't expect you'd understand this stuff." Every word, look, and doubt was built into a wall. A wall Ava hadn't broken through with force, but had climbed step by careful step. And now Ava could feel all those years rushing back on this plane. She realized what was happening didn't even shock her anymore, because discrimination was never rare for people like her. She took a deep breath and quietly glanced at Marcus, the flight attendant still trying to maintain professionalism in an increasingly sensitive situation. "Would you like me to ask a few other passengers?" Marcus offered to Bradley, just as several nearby travelers had begun turning their attention toward the trio. Bradley gave a curt nod. "Go ahead. I'm not sitting next to her." Ava turned her head toward the window. The morning sunlight reflected sharply off the airplane's wing, brilliant white and serene. a stark contrast to the silent tide rising inside her. But she stayed silent, not because she wasn't angry enough, but because she had learned to stay composed. She just wanted to be treated fairly. That's something people like Bradley would never understand. They never had to second-guess every word before speaking. Never had to pause mid-sentence in a meeting to wonder, will this sound too demanding, too aggressive, too emotional? But Ava always had to think, always had to calculate, always had to seem just right. Marcus returned a few minutes later, his face slightly tense. "No one is willing to switch seats, sir," he told Bradley. "We can move you to economy class if necessary." Bradley looked insulted. "I didn't pay to be shoved in the back with those people." This time Ava lifted her head. Her eyes met his, and for a split second he looked away. The air grew heavier than the sealed cabin could contain. A few passengers began whispering. No one raised their voice, but everyone knew what was happening. Ava, a successful black woman, dressed in a blazer holding a valid first-class ticket, was being shunned by a man who didn't want to sit next to her because of the color of her skin. And for the first time in years, Ava felt that she didn't want to stay silent anymore. She lowered her magazine completely, turned to Bradley, and in a voice soft yet impossible to ignore, said, "If you're uncomfortable, maybe the problem isn't me." Bradley pressed his lips together. That sentence was so simple that it silenced everyone around them. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't named names. But everyone understood she had just held a mirror to his face. Ava turned back and sat up straighter. And for the first time during the entire flight, she felt she was not alone. Flight attendant Marcus walked away, leaving behind a cold, tense space between Ava and Bradley. Neither of them spoke, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was a wordless standoff, taut as a drawn string. Ava opened her laptop. The screen glowed softly as she skimmed through the presentation she had prepared for her upcoming meeting in Seattle. Her hand moved the mouse out of habit, but her eyes weren't reading. Her mind was heavy not because of Bradley, but because of how familiar this felt. One row behind, in seat 3C, a woman leaned slightly forward. Young, with wavy curls and a phone in hand, though she wasn't filming. She was typing rapidly, jotting something down. Her name was Chloe Ramirez, a travel blogger specializing in capturing journeys, people, and the unusual things encountered along the way. Chloe hadn't caught the entire exchange, but she understood exactly what was happening from the body language, the glances, and the tension between the two passengers in front of her. Chloe wasn't an investigative journalist, but she had a sharp instinct for stories worth telling. She marked a line on her phone. "White man refuses to sit next to black woman. No clear reason, says he's uncomfortable." Tension rising. The flight attendant's response was calm and precise. The woman's CEO's demeanor doesn't need to raise her voice. In the first-class cabin, a middle-aged couple in seats 1D and 1F turned their heads ever so slightly to glance back. The wife leaned in to whisper something to her husband. Her eyes lingered on Ava, part sympathy, part admiration. The husband nodded gently, as if the two had just silently agreed on something that didn't need to be said aloud. They didn't intervene. They didn't show overt support. But they knew who was in the right and who was not. Bradley sat stiffly back straight, hands clasped tightly on his lap. But every small gesture, his fingers tapping the armrest, the occasional sideways glance at the attendants betrayed the inner storm raging inside him. And that discomfort, instead of spreading to Ava, had begun to isolate him in the eyes of the people around. Another flight attendant, Linda, swept down the aisle to check the cabin. She paused briefly at row 2. "Would either of you care for some water?" she asked, voice polite, expression neutral. "Scotch." "On the rocks," Bradley said flatly. Ava smiled slightly without looking at Linda and replied clearly, "Sparkling water? Thank you." Linda nodded. As she turned, she cast Ava a passing glance, soft as a breeze, but one that said unmistakably, I see you. I understand. When Linda returned with the drinks, Chloe from 3C stood up to head to the restroom. As she passed Ava's seat, she paused for just a brief moment. "Excuse me," she said gently, nearly a whisper. "You're truly inspiring." Ava turned to her slightly surprised. She hadn't said anything yet when Chloe added, "I'm a travel blogger. I won't record anything or do anything disrespectful. But if you need someone to bear witness, I'm here." Ava managed a small, quiet smile, but inside she felt something warm stir. On this flight that had felt so isolating, she now knew she wasn't alone. Meanwhile, Marcus, the same flight attendant from earlier, stood in quiet conversation with Linda at the back of the cabin. "This isn't right," he said in a hushed voice. "But we're not authorized to intervene unless there's overt abuse or clear threats." Linda nodded. "Still, the attitude is undeniable." Marcus sighed. "I'll keep an eye on it. If things escalate, we alert the captain." Back in her seat, Ava closed her laptop and leaned back slightly. Her gaze remained fixed ahead, distant. Two emotions wrestled inside her, the ache of being demeaned and the strength of having chosen not to stay silent. She didn't need the whole cabin to applaud or take her side. She just needed to hold on to her dignity. That was enough. She didn't yet know that something much bigger was quietly taking shape. Her story was being noticed and documented, and it was about to spread far beyond the confines of Flight 476. The Boeing 737 had been out of Texas airspace for nearly an hour. Outside the window beside seat 2A, soft white clouds drifted slowly below. Sunlight lay like silk over the wing, and everything appeared calm. But just minutes later, the cabin intercom came to life with the deep, steady voice of the captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to enter a zone of mild turbulence due to an unstable air mass ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please take your positions." A light jolt. Ava placed her glass of water on the tray table. Bradley glanced out the window, exhaled quietly then, adjusted his seatbelt. No more muttering. A soft clatter from the plane's rear came an airline cart bumping against a seat, and then silence. A stronger jolt. The aircraft swayed slightly as if someone had pushed it sideways. There were a few startled gasps from the back. A cocktail glass tipped and red liquid spilled onto the seat cover. Flight attendant Marcus rushed down the aisle to steady an elderly passenger who had just stood up. Ava bit her lip. She had flown hundreds of times enough to know this wasn't dangerous turbulence yet, but the feeling of unease was unavoidable. Bradley said nothing now. His hands clutched the armrests, eyes staring straight ahead, his shoulders stiff as stone. Thud. The plane jolted harder. Some passengers screamed. The entire cabin rocked sharply to one side. From seat 3C, Chloe dropped her phone, murmuring a prayer. Ava gripped the armrest on her right, trying to breathe deeply. Her hair had come slightly undone, but she managed to maintain a composed appearance. Beside her, Bradley let out a sound, not loud, but enough for Ava to hear. "Oh, God." A voice, stripped of arrogance. She turned to look at him for the first time, really look. And she saw the man who had oozed smug confidence just hours before was now visibly trembling. His face had gone pale, lips, pressed tight forehead glistening with sweat. Part of Ava wanted to feel triumphant. But no. What she felt instead was a strange ache of pity. Because perhaps for the first time, Bradley Whitman was realizing he wasn't the center of the world. The turbulence lasted nearly 8 minutes. The aircraft bounced like it was riding waves. The whispers died into silence. Everyone just hoped to pass through safely. And then, the intercom again. "This is Captain Harris. We've cleared the turbulent zone. The air ahead is stable." Thank you for your patience. A collective exhale swept through the cabin. Chloe tapped her chest lightly, murmuring, "Thank God." A few passengers clapped, softly but sincerely. Ava leaned her head back. Her heart pounded, but her mind was clearer than ever. When humans face danger, skin color, wealth status, all become meaningless. Bradley adjusted his jacket. He said nothing, but a flicker of panic crossed his face as he noticed Ava looking at him. She didn't smile, didn't scold, didn't gloat. She just asked in the gentlest voice, "Are you all right?" Bradley averted his gaze, not answering immediately. Then he gave a small nod. He was no longer in control for the first time since the flight began. No longer the one dealing out disdainful glances or pompous commands. Ava didn't have to say anything more. The truth had spoken for itself. Flight attendant Marcus walked by again, checking on passengers. He paused at row 2. "Are you both okay?" Bradley said. "Give me a strong drink." Ava. "Sparkling water again, please." Marcus nodded and moved on. Behind them, Chloe kept taking notes. Quickly, thoroughly. No one needed to shout. No one needed to deliver a lecture. But now everyone could see who held dignity and who was shaking. And Ava, without ever raising her voice, had proven her strength in a way no one could deny. And then a bold idea began to form in her mind. A way to flip the script not through outrage, but through the most daring action she had ever considered. The plane had stabilized at cruising altitude again after the turbulence, but the atmosphere around row 2 remained heavy. Ava set her glass of water on the folding tray, her eyes gazing out the window, but her thoughts were spiraling elsewhere. The idea that sparked the moment she saw Bradley's real fear was growing louder in her mind. It was an action beyond reaction, a way to protect herself and actively redefine the space from which she had just been pushed. She took out her phone connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi and entered the password. The American Airlines homepage loaded on the screen. Ava took a deep breath. Her fingers tapped into the search bar, "Purchase additional seats. First class, Flight 476, Dallas, Seattle." The search returned a list of remaining empty seats, and just a few remained unoccupied. Usually, passengers weren't allowed to purchase additional seats once the plane was airborne, but Ava knew she had leverage with her business elite membership and direct access to customer support. She opened the airline's live chat window. Ava. "Hello, I'd like to ask about the possibility of purchasing all remaining empty seats in the first-class cabin on the flight I'm currently on." The response came within seconds. "Agent, hello, Ms. Mitchell. This is quite an unusual request. Allow me to transfer you to a senior manager for verification and support." Ava nodded to herself even though no one could see. The conversation was routed to a manager named Heather, an executive coordinator for American Airlines, who appeared in the chat window. "Heather, hello, Ms. Mitchell. I see that you're requesting to purchase all unoccupied first-class seats on Flight 476. Is there a specific reason for this unusual request?" Ava hesitated for just a beat, then typed, "Ava, I experienced clear racial discrimination from the passenger seated next to me. He refused to sit near me simply because I'm a black woman. There's been no violence, but his attitude and words clearly state it. I don't want to argue or escalate. I want a space that's decent and peaceful. If I can buy out the rest of the cabin, I'd like to do so. And if possible, I'd like to invite a few passengers from economy, those who might need it more, to join me." The chat window went quiet for a moment. Then, Heather, "We appreciate the way you've handled the situation. This is unprecedented, but if you're serious and agree to the cost, I'll make the arrangements." Ava, "I agree. Send me the invoice." The amount appeared $8,420, a sum that would give anyone pause. But for Ava, a tech startup CEO whose company was valued in the millions, and more importantly, A woman who refused to have her dignity trampled midair hit confirm transaction without hesitation. At that moment, Chloe, the travel blogger in seat 3C, leaned slightly forward. "Excuse me, Ava Wright," she said softly, her tone polite. Ava turned, nodding gently. "I don't mean to intrude, but I just wanted to say you're doing something most people wouldn't dare to do." Ava smiled. "Thank you, but I think I just did the craziest thing I've done all year." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Ava lowered her voice. "I just bought all the empty seats in first class." A moment of silence. Then Chloe let out a small, delighted laugh, her eyes shining like someone who had just witnessed the ultimate power move. "You're not crazy," she said. "You just rewrote the rules." 15 minutes later, the lead flight attendant, Caroline, approached Ava's seat with a tablet in hand and tapped lightly. "Ms. Mitchell, we've received confirmation from the airline. You have successfully purchased all remaining unoccupied seats in the first-class cabin. I've been instructed to let you reassign seating if you wish." "Do you have any specific requests?" Ava looked toward Bradley, who was still seated beside her. His face began to shift as he tried to understand what was happening. She replied calmly, "I'd like to invite 3 economy passengers, an elderly couple I saw traveling together at check-in, and a young woman sitting by the window in row 20. I can indicate their seats." Caroline nodded. "I'll make the arrangements." As for Bradley, he remained seated. He wasn't removed. He wasn't humiliated. But he was now surrounded no longer by people like him, but by the very kindness he had rejected. The game had shifted, but not through force, through the quiet power of a woman who knew exactly who she was and refused to take a single step back, whether on the ground or in the sky. Row 2 had completely transformed. Beside Ava, the space where Bradley had once felt like the center of gravity now stood as a silent void of defeat. No one confronted him. No one said a harsh word. But from the way people avoided his eyes, from the weight of Ava's unshakable presence, he knew he had lost. A loss not enforced by rules, but by the fact that the woman he had deemed inferior had dared to hold her head higher than anyone else. A few rows back, Chloe, the seasoned blogger, was still taking notes. She hadn't recorded any faces, hadn't named any names. But through her sharp writing, each moment she had witnessed was now starting to live on social media. A businesswoman just bought back her dignity by purchasing every empty first-class seat to stand up against racial discrimination on the flight I'm currently on. Attached a photo taken from behind showing only the silhouette of Ava typing on her laptop, sunlight from the window glowing through her hair like an accidental halo. Beneath the caption, hashtags, Flight 476. Say no to racism, our first-class power. The first post, 172 likes in 10 minutes. The second image of surprised passengers invited to first class began spreading like wildfire. On another Wi-Fi signal elsewhere on the plane, Ava still had no idea. She was focused on the presentation for her meeting later that day, but something inside her whispered. The outside world was about to hear this story. 20 minutes later. As the flight attendant served another round of drinks, Chloe leaned in gently. "Sorry to interrupt, but you should know your story is gaining much traction online." Ava looked up. Online. Chloe handed her the phone. The screen showed over 200 shares and hundreds of comments. Among them, "Someone find me the name of this phenomenal woman. This isn't revenge. This is class. The exact kind of CEO we need in this era." "Who is she?" "I want to invest in her company immediately." Ava froze. She didn't know whether to feel proud or unsettled. Chloe sensed it and said softly, "You don't need to do anything. You've already done enough. Keep being you." Bradley saw it in seat 2C too. A passenger from economy walked past, whispering without realizing, "She's the one who bought out first class." He heard it. His face turned pale. He opened his phone, scrolled through social media. Chloe hadn't named him, but anyone on that flight would recognize him. And if someone posted his face, linked it to the story, his reputation, career, and connections could all collapse. Bradley turned to look at Ava, but she didn't look back. She now existed in a light he no longer had permission to enter. As the plane descended, Ava finally opened her phone to check her emails an hour later. 20 plus unread, 5 interview requests from major business publications, and a message from her company's head of communications. "Ava, you're trending on Twitter and LinkedIn. Do you want us to prepare an official media response? You're the CEO of CyberShield, and now you're a symbol." Ava closed her eyes for a moment. She hadn't boarded the plane to be famous. She had only wanted to protect her boundary of dignity, but now she understood. Some moments are not chosen, but how we face them writes our character. The plane landed. A cold breeze from the Seattle sky swept down onto the runway. But inside Ava, a slow-burning fire remained. The story wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The Boeing 737 let out a soft screech as its wheels touched down. A gentle tremor rippled through the cabin, but Ava Mitchell's heart felt heavier than that. She knew this flight was no longer just a personal journey. When the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began standing up and reaching for their bags. Ava remained seated. She opened her phone, and Twitter's interface lit up like a rolling sea of headlines. Her name, Ava Mitchell, was trending at number 3 nationwide. She scrolled quickly. Ava Mitchell, CEO of CyberShield, just silenced the nation with the classiest response on flight AA476. A black woman, a first-class cabin, and a master class in self-respect. "Can someone make her the secretary of no tolerance, please?" Ava gripped her phone, not out of fear, but with the awareness that every time a woman of color speaks up, there will be 2 waves of reaction support and attack. She was ready for both. Bradley Whitman sat at the back of the cabin with his head down. The arrogance was gone. No grumbling, no glares. Just a man quietly pulling his suitcase, walking away. As he passed Ava, he paused for a second. Their eyes met not with rage, but with the dull, cloudy void of confusion and defeat. No apology. No excuse, just a glance heavy with the weight of being broken by his own prejudice. Ava didn't respond. She didn't need to. Some battles don't require swords when the truth has already been spoken. At baggage claim, Ava sat in a quiet corner. Her phone buzzed continuously. An email from CNN inviting her for a live interview. A message from MSNBC requesting an official response. A direct message from a stranger, "I'm Mariam Carter, representing Seattle's Next Vision Investment Fund. We'd love to meet with you this week." Ava hadn't replied to any of them. She was still processing. When she looked up, she saw Chloe Ramirez, the travel blogger from seat 3C, approaching phone in hand, eyes glowing like she had just dropped a viral story. "It's happening," Chloe said. "You should know your first post has already passed 800,000 views in just 2 hours. Ava blinked. "When did you start documenting the moment he started mumbling about being uncomfortable sitting next to you?" "I didn't live stream, but I documented everything truthfully and with context. And his name, I didn't mention it. But the internet moves faster than the FBI. Ava smiled. "Then let the internet do its part. As for me, I'll do mine." That afternoon, Ava walked into a sleek tech headquarters in downtown Seattle for her most crucial business negotiation of the year. She entered the glass-walled conference room where soft afternoon light poured across a deep black wooden table. She brought with her not just pitch decks, but a media storm. 4 executives were already seated. The first to rise, a polished, middle-aged man, extended a hand. We read the story, and all I want to say is, we don't do business with cowards. We choose people with a spine. Ava was caught off guard. No need to say anything more. The meeting went on as if every door had already been opened. Midway through, a female CFO proposed, beyond the partnership, we'd like to join the next investment round in CyberShield. Ava, you're not just protecting data, you're defending dignity, and we want to stand with that. Ava tightened her grip on her pen. For the first time that day, she let herself exhale fully. That night, Ava sat alone in her room at her hotel in downtown Seattle, laptop open in front of her. Her inbox showed a new message, from an unfamiliar address. No dramatic subject line, just a simple one. From Bradley Whitman. Ava held her breath. Her eyes didn't blink. She clicked. I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not even sure why I'm writing this. I was wrong. I know that. I was raised with skewed beliefs and carried them into the sky. But then you showed me not with words, but with action. I can't keep hiding. I've lost contracts. I've lost my reputation. But I know most of it I brought it on myself. I hope it starts here if there's any place to begin again. Thank you, even though you owe me nothing. Ava read it 3 times. She didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because the healing journey must belong to the one who began it, not to her. The night was quiet. Outside Seattle buzzed with news of the woman who bought out first class for a reason no one will forget. Ava Mitchell closed her laptop and looked out the high-rise window, and the city lights reflected in her eyes. She hadn't necessarily won, but she hadn't been consumed. And for a black woman in her position, that was enough to begin writing a new chapter. 1 week after the Flight 476 incident, Ava Mitchell was no longer just a name whispered within tech circles. She appeared on the cover of Time magazine under the headline, Grace at 35,000 feet, a CEO who refused to stay silent. Beneath the cinematic portrait was a woman in a black suit, her gaze sharp yet calm. Ava wasn't performing. That was someone who stood tall without needing to shout. CNN aired a primetime feature report replaying clips from Chloe's viral post. No dramatic scenes. No shouting. Just the calm narration of a witness and the image of a businesswoman opening her laptop, mid-flight, buying back silence with powerful presence. It wasn't just what Ava did. It was how she did it with strategy, poise, and without compromise. She wasn't merely someone who responded to racism. She had redefined what resistance could look like in the modern era. Within 10 days, Ava had received an invitation to speak at TEDx San Francisco with the topic, not about the seat, but the standing. An email from the Office of the President. We'd like to invite you to serve on the Advisory Council for Diversity and Innovation in Business. And a publishing offer for a book, Tell Your Story from Startup CEO to Cultural Symbol. But Ava didn't rush to accept. While the media tried to box her into a heroic woman narrative, she stood firm. I didn't win anything. I just refused to be diminished. She didn't do it to become a symbol. She did it because silence was no longer an option. At the CyberShield headquarters in Austin, staff held a special town hall meeting. Many had tears in their eyes when Ava walked in. A young engineer broke down saying, I'm a person of color too. I've sat in economy wearing a hoodie invisible to flight attendants. But when I saw you on the news, I felt like someone finally spoke for me. Ava hugged her. She didn't give a long speech. She said, "From today, we don't just build secure tech. We build a workplace where everyone is seen for their true worth. That's the strongest firewall we can ever build." On social media, the debates continued. Some criticized Ava as showy and accused her of using wealth to retaliate, but the overwhelming majority supported her. People began sharing their moments on flights in cafes and boardrooms when they were overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated for their skin color, gender, or because they didn't look successful. The hashtag Ava effect began to spread widely. 1 week later, at her first public appearance since the flight, Ava stood on stage at a conference on technology and ethics. No PowerPoint, no booming rhetoric. She told the story of Bradley Whitman's glare, the tightness in her chest before buying out first class, and the unexpected apology email. "I didn't buy a seat to stand out. I bought back space so no one could make me disappear." Sometimes resistance isn't about shouting. It's simply refusing to give up your seat just because someone else feels uncomfortable. The room rose in a standing ovation. That night, Ava received a call from her mother. "I used to teach you not to bow your head to anyone who says you don't belong. Today, I saw you do more than that. You changed the room so those who come after you won't have to bow either." Ava cried. Not from exhaustion, but because for the first time she truly understood real success isn't about the seat you occupy, but the value you leave behind when you rise from it. A few months later, Ava Mitchell returned to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport on a crisp autumn morning. Same terminal doors, same glowing gateboard, same cafe where she once sipped an espresso silently waiting for her flight to Seattle. But this time, Ava was no longer just a well-known tech entrepreneur. She was a symbol, though she had never called herself one. She rolled her suitcase past other travelers, busy and hurried. No one gave her side eyes. No one frowned when she entered the priority line wearing a sharp suit and natural curls over brown skin. Because now they knew who Ava Mitchell was. And more importantly, they knew why she belonged. At the gate, she overheard two passengers behind her whispering, "Remember the woman who bought out first class? That's Ava Mitchell." "Yeah, she's seriously inspiring. I'm ashamed I ever sat silent when I saw injustice." Ava didn't turn around, but a small smile appeared. It wasn't pride. It was the quiet certainty that change was truly taking root. Ava sat in first class again on her next flight to New York. But there were no contemptuous glances. The woman beside her, an Asian-American entrepreneur, started a conversation about startups and company culture. No pretense, no barriers. That's what Ava had fought for, not privilege. But the normalization of diversity. No one was surprised anymore that the CEO next to them was a black woman. No one was uncomfortable with her success simply because they hadn't expected it. Ava delivered a keynote in New York at the United Nations Innovation Forum. Her topic, leadership in the age of identity. She walked on stage without an introduction. The room already knew her, had read her story, had felt it. She didn't retell the flight. She spoke of what came after. There was a flood of interview requests, from which she only chose the ones with a purpose. The letters from black students thanking her for showing them they too belonged in first class, literally and metaphorically. The investors who once doubted her are now returning with proposals. And herself, Ava today was no longer the woman in the black blazer who boarded Flight 476. She was stronger. She believed in herself more. "I used to think the best response to discrimination was to stay quiet and move on. But I've learned silence can be complicity. You don't need to shout. You need to stand your ground and stay in your seat." The room was silent. No applause right away. None needed. The message had landed. At the same time, in a quiet bar on the outskirts of Chicago, Bradley Whitman, the man who once insulted Ava, sat alone rewatching the viral clip from the flight. No one recognized him. No one invited him to conferences. No partner returned his calls. In front of him, unsigned divorce papers. Behind him, a company that no longer had a place for him. On screen, Ava Mitchell remained poised and powerful just as he remembered. He didn't hate her anymore. He hated the part of himself that once believed he was above others. Ava didn't just scale CyberShield into one of America's leading cybersecurity startups in the following months. She launched the 476 Initiative, a scholarship fund and support organization for underrepresented youth in STEM, helping them claim their rightful seats, not by buying them, but by being seen. On New Year's Eve, Ava stood alone in her Austin high-rise fireworks, reflecting in the window. She whispered to herself a gentle reminder. A seat can make someone feel small, but it can also be the start of something much, much greater. She sipped her red wine and smiled.